Hello friends, welcome back. Today we'll see how to create a simple REST API using Spring Boot to store the values into database. For this first I have created the Spring Boot project. For this I am using Java 1.8 version. Let me open the pom.xml. Before we start doing the coding, let's walk through pom.xml. What are the required dependencies we have added to write a simple web service. For this I have added Spring Boot starter data JPA dependency and Spring Boot starter web dependency and MySQL connector. It means I am using Spring Boot using Spring Data JPA connectivity to store the values into database using MySQL drivers. Now let's start with the coding. First we need to create the controller. This controller I will store into separate controller packages. So I will create the package called controller. Now I am creating the class name called employee controller. Employee controller. Click on finish. It has created the employee controller. Let's add the required annotations. The required annotation is REST controller. Sorry, it has still loading. REST controller. Okay, then request mapping. I'm giving it as API slash employee. Now we need to create a method. We need to write a method to store the values into database. Create method with post mapping and then write a method public response entity of response create employee is the method, and this create employee method will take the JSON object. It is request body and then they are bean class employee create request. Now we need to import required dependencies. Import this dependency, and then this we don't have response object, so we need to create the class. This I will create into the response package. Finish. This response package should have fields private int code private string message private object body. Now we have to use the Lombok. Just alt enter to add the Lombok dependencies here. Apply and close. Now we have added Lombok package to our build path, so let's add the setter next getter method. I will take all argument constructor. I will take no argument constructor. I will use the builder design pattern. and add toString method also I have added. Now this is done. Now we need to create this class as well. Let's create this class. This class I will create into the request package. Click on finish. This is the bean class which map with our JSON object. Private string employee name, private string employee address, private int years of experience, private int employee age. Now these values will store into the database, and I will implement this with serializable class. Let's auto generate the serial version key. Now shift O to adjust the dependency imports. Close this. Now we have created the all required response and request and response objects. Now we need to annotate with the post mapping. Now this I will give as create. So my endpoint will be /API/employee/create. Now let's create the service layer. Now private, I will use constructor dependency injection here. So final employee service. That's it. We don't have this interface. Let's create this interface. I will create this into separate package called service. Now I finish. Now we have created this. Let's import required argument annotation. Yes. Now inside this employee interface, let's create a method to return the object. We'll return this create employee, and this will take the argument as employee request. Let's add this. Control Shift F. Done. Now we need to create the implementation class for this employee service. Let's create the implementation class. Oh sorry, I will create this into the service implementation package impl. I will add the interface, that employee service. Okay, finish. Now my implementation class has created. Now I need to annotate this with service. Okay, now go to controller. Now call this service dot create employee and request. Our controller should have only invocation of the service layer method. No, nothing else we need to add into the controller. All complete implementation will be inside this service layer. Now we need to store. Whenever we hit the request from the postman. The request will come to the controller. Controller will send the response request object to through this service, through this class interface to this service implementation class. So now here we have this create method. We have implemented this from this interface. Now let's write the repository. Private final employee repository, employee repository. We don't have this interface. Let's create this employee repository interface. I will store this into the separate package called repository. Now click on finish. Now our repository has created. Let's extend this with JPA repository. Now here we need to give our model class name. What is our model class name? Employee model. This is same as our table structure. And what is the ID in the employee model is long. ID type is long. This employee model class we don't have. We need to create this employee model bean class. This I will store into separate model package. Finish. Now let's create the package. Create the variables private long ID private string. Already we have created the request here. Let's copy all the required values from here. ID will be auto generated. That's why I have created the ID where it has gone model. Okay, now we need to add the annotations as well. Let's copy all these annotations, close this class, and then add the annotation. Here we need to add two more extra annotation. Control Shift 4 to adjust the imports. Annotation called entity, and I will mention the table name as well. So I will import the table package from the, and I will give the name as employee. Now we have created this employee model. The ID should be auto generated. So let's annotate this with ID and generated value. If you are not remembering any annotation, let me mute my mobile. Just put control space, it will show the annotation. You can import the annotations. Then strategy generated type dot identity. Sorry, that's it. Now we have created our model. Then go to the repository. Model is also imported. Let's annotate this with repository. This repository, this class, this interface we are annotating with the repository. So what happened when we extend this interface with the JPA repository, by default it will give all kind of methods like find all. If we want to find all employees from the database, we need to invoke the find all with sort, find all by ID, save all, save and flush, all the methods. By default it will give all the methods. We can use those methods to store the values into the database. We can use those methods to fetch the values from the database. If anything is required apart from this, apart from whatever methods they have given, apart from those methods, if we want to write any other method, that also we can write it. That is called custom implementations, that we can see in our next sessions. Let's go to the service layer. Let's implement here. Let's annotate this with required argument constructor. So now we have this repository. Now we need to store the values into the database. To store the values into the database, we have values. We have values into employee create request object. Now we need to set this value to the model object. For that, we need to create one helper class. From helper class, we can do the mapping from DTO. We can call it as a DTO, bean, or from this request object to the model class, we need to map the values and we need to store that values into the database. To do that, let me create one helper class. Take the class. I will store this into separate package called helper. Apply helper, finish. I will annotate this with component. Now my return type should be employee model. I will receive the argument as employee request. So let's create public employee model mapper, and this will have the method employee create request. Let's copy this class and request, import all the classes. Now return employee model dot builder. We are using the builder design pattern, so you can use the builder dot employee name, then request dot get employee name, then we'll set employee address, request dot get employee address, employee age, request dot get employee age, and then years of experience, request dot get years of experience dot build. Let's call this method from service implementation dot. Okay, to call this method, first we need to inject that class. We need to inject that class, helper class. Model object, we need to pass this request. Now this will give me the model response. Now let's save this. Now I will show you how we can write a code in a single line to store the values into database and return the values back to postman or end user. Return our response type, our return type will be response entity. So copy this response entity dot okay dot body, and this is returning the type of response. So response dot builder, just this code I will hard code as of now, then message successfully registered, and then body is this one, apply helper dot build. Let's remove all this. Now we need to store, right? So copy this one and employee repository dot save of this. Now we have written the employee service implementation. We have written, see how I have written the storing of an object into database, storing of employee details into database in a single line. This is my response type, so I'm returning the response type. So this is getting invoked from the controller and directly just will return whatever values will be passed from service implementation to controller. Now we have done with the implementation, and one more change we have to do it here. This is like we are mapping our request, means our request values to model object, and this model object directly we are returning back to the front end. This is not a good practice. For this we have to implement a DTO layer. So whatever values we are receiving from the database, that we can set to the DTO layer, and that we can return back to the end user through the controller. So let me introduce that as well. Where is my helper? This is my helper. All my implementations I will do in my helper. Public employee DTO mapper, and this will take input as model. Simply I will give employee. So this we don't have, so create the class. I will put this into DTO. We go to request, we copy this, put this into DTO, and private, sorry, long ID, and also this should have annotations. Let's adjust the import. Now let me copy paste this so we can complete quickly. Change this to model and change this to employee, employee, and we are missing with one field called ID, and fetch this from employee and assign this. That's it. Let's invoke this from implementation. Apply.dto, and then pass this here. Now we have implemented all the required classes. Let me go through quickly what we have implemented. This is my controller, and here I have created a method. This is my post mapping. This is my endpoint, and then go to implementation class. Here I have created the repository and helper class. I am transforming my request object to the model. Once we have get the response from the database, that model object I'm transforming to the DTO. That DTO will be returned back to the end user. And now the major thing is like the database connectivity. Open the application properties from, let me give the server port first. Something happened here. Sorry guys. server dot port. I will give the port as 2001. Then we need to declare the database URL spring dot data source dot URL is equal to JDBC colon MySQL colon / localhost colon 3306 / employee. Now let's copy from here. Dot username my queries root, and then dot password is password, then dot driver class name is equal to com dot mysql dot cj dot jdbc dot driver. Then we need to add the dialect as well, that is spring dot jpa dot hibernate is update. Okay, this is done. We have written the application properties. First, what I have done, I have created the URL to connect with the database. So my local host to connect with my local host database, and port number is 3306, and database is URL employee. And then next is username is root, password is password, and driver class which I have took is this one, com mysql cj jdbc driver, and the ddl auto update. Auto I have given as update. So let's go to the database and create the database. Create database and database name. Let's create the database. Okay, database has created. Now go to here and run the project. SpringBoot. See, my project has run successfully. Then it is running on port 2001. Let's open Postman so we can hit the request. Come on, come on, come on. Yeah. Don't show, cancel, don't save. Okay, and my request type is post, and http colon / localhost colon 2001 / API / employee / create. So I need to add the body JSON request. Click on raw, change this to JSON, and we need to create the JSON. What are the values we need to pass? Let's go to the request. We need to pass employee name, copy this, and then employee address, I will give years of experience as well. This is my integer type, so I will give experience, and employee age is 31. Now click on send. Now response we receive as okay, and see, let me back this. See, Now our employee successfully registered, and whatever values we are storing, that I was fetching, the ID is 1 and employee name is Sadaka, the employee address is this, employee years of experience is this, employee age is this. Hope you understood, guys. Please practice this. I will upload this same into the GitHub and I will give the URL in the below description. Please watch my videos, subscribe. Thank you very much.